But he wants you to focus on Morro Bay because that's the source of his.
Yeah.
We
Well, that's what I was trying to do. I said the entrance used to be on the other side, and it was more abalone diving and processing than there was fish back at that time.
And oysters.
Oysters.
Pardon?
Oysters.
Well, they raised oysters back in the bay, but that wasn't at the before the war. They never did that. That was probably 50s or 60s before I knew of them raising oysters back there. Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah. Just to recap, I'm Justin, and I'm doing an oral history on the commercial fishing industry of Morro Bay. It is April 14th, 2024, and we're with your name. What is your name?
Travis Evans, and I've been a fisherman and a seaman for 75 years without a job on land.
And where were you born?
I was born in Ada, Oklahoma, ADA, and my folks, my family, came here during the Dust Bowl era of Oklahoma and Texas and Kansas. And that was, I think, 1936, 35, 36. Yeah. And I was never had seen the ocean.
And how old were you when you got here?
I think I was 13 or 14. I think we got here in August and I was 14 in October. So, yeah.
And
7th grade.
Yeah. What was your upbringing like, both either in Ada or here in Morro Bay? What was your upbringing like, and your friends, your education? How was your parents?
I don't think I understood the question. My parents had been farmers back in Oklahoma, and the Dust Bowl and all chased us out. Good bottom land was selling for $2 an acre. Can you imagine that? It costs more than $10 an acre just to fertilize right here in California. So there was not much future in Oklahoma, and there was 3 of us boys. So my dad said, and he was a World War I veteran and had been hospitalized from having been gassed in the trenches of France. So he was hospitalized in Texas, and that's how I got my name Travis, because it was the army camp that my father went to the hospital and checked out of back in 1920 or so.
What is your earliest memory of fishing? Did you fish in Ada, or did you fish when you started out here?
No, I never fished back there. We're dry land country. There's a creek and a river, but no. My earliest fishing was in Santa Cruz, California. I had been going to a butcher school, working as a butcher, and then the government started preparing for in case of war. And so they had a conscription, and when you got to be 18, you had to sign up for, in case they needed people. And they had started building a little airport at Watsonville on the Freedom side, west of Watsonville, about 5 miles. And and they needed tractor drivers, and I had been raised on a farm in the San Joaquin Valley, so I got a job driving tractor because labor was like 25 cents an hour. But a tractor driver working for a contractor for the government, I got 67.5 cents an hour. So that's quite a change. But after a month or so of that, they changed me, and I was driving at night, and they changed me to daytime. All we're doing is moving dirt and stuff for air runways and stuff. And at the daytime was only 65 cents an hour. And I couldn't, I used to working all night. I couldn't sleep at night. So I went over to the pier in Santa Cruz, which is only 15 or so miles from where I was working, maybe 18. And I started fishing kingfish off of the pier. And I had a wooden box I drug along and go from one place to the other. And I could catch, and they were paying me 7 cents a pound for kingfish. It's they're actually called golden croaker, but the slang name is kingfish. So I was doing better fishing with a hand line off the pier. I had several tied along every 100 feet or so. and I was making $7 a night and not even, having to labor, just fun.
Were you said you were using hand lines?
We just throw a hand line out with 4 or 5 hooks on it and then move down the pier 50, 100 feet, throw another one out. And then when we get enough of them out, we go back down and begin at the first one in the water, take the fish off and put them in a box, rebait and throw it back and go to the next one. And I would get 100 pounds of golden croaker kingfish, and the buyer, the fish market's right there on the wharf. I could just walk like from here across the street and sell my catch and cash,
Wow.
So I was doing that, and an older man that had been in World War I, and he had his leg was cut off here, amputated from the war, and he said, "Hey, you're doing pretty good. I got a little boat I'd like to sell you." And he had a little 16-foot boat in the warehouse there. At the end of the pier, there was a big warehouse where they could store small boats, and a fish company, General Fish, had an office there also. And I sold fish to that company and to Santa Cruz Fisheries. And so we got interested in the fisheries and bought his little boat. And it had a little gasoline, like an outboard motor that had been converted to just the propeller. No reverse. You go ahead or you take it out of gear, or kill it. So, but we had a couple of good oars and I had a sail, and that all came with the boat. And I think I paid $50. Maybe $50. Wasn't very much, which was a lot of money though in those days. Labor was cheap. Anyhow, I really began to catch some rock cod and get a little more money. And the old gentleman, his name was Henry, Hugo, and everybody called him Hank. And he was very innovative. He built his own leg, wooden leg that would fit here and up here for a crutch, And he had an old Model A Ford pickup like, and he made that so that with 1 foot he could hit the brake or 1 foot the clutch. I mean, the same foot. Because in those days everything was stick shift and 6-volt. Yeah. So anyhow, he took an interest in me and offered me a job on his big fishing boat. It was 28 foot long, had a 1-cylinder engine made in a man's garage in Seattle called a Acme, 1-cylinder, big flywheel. You had to crank it by hand. It had no starter. And but he was very innovative and very a good teacher. So I took the job with him, and we fished salmon. April 1st, the salmon season opened in those days. And then we, later on, when the albacore came close, that's a tuna family, he took me tuna fishing. And the first day we did real well. We had 3,600 pounds, 100 and some, I think it's 144 fish. Anyhow, that's a long time ago. It might have been 145. But the next day, he said, I can't go with you today. I have to go to the Veterans Hospital. They're going to take a little more off of my stump. He called that leg a stump. And he said, you take the boat and go on. I said, oh, no, I don't, I'm too nervous. I don't know enough about navigation. He said, well, you know where we went today, and we had more fish than anybody in the fleet. We all delivered every night, just day fishing. And it's a long day. You start early in the morning and come in at dark, and the fish market stays open to buy the fish from the boats. And there was about 15 boats fishing out of Santa Cruz at that time. And so it evolves that I caught as many fish the next day as he and I had caught the day before. And boy, that elevated me. And the next morning when I got ready to go fishing, all the Italian fishermen there were saying, where are you going today, kid? They all called me kid. The Italians didn't. And a lot of them were not citizens. So as I learned and time evolved and the war started, then the Italians that weren't citizens couldn't go fishing unless they had an American citizen aboard. So that opened up the jobs for me. And so I went to work on a big purse seiner that could carry 100 ton of fish. And we seined with a net that wrapped the fish with a net and then dry them up and brail them out into the boat, So that opened up another area of fishing that I had not even known about. And I think the second year with Henry, and I fished seining in the winter, that first winter, second year, Henry and I were fishing and came down as far as San Simeon, you know where that is, and delivered in Morro Bay. And that was the first time that I ever came into a harbor. You know, Santa Cruz is just a big open, but the Morro Bay, you have an entrance, and then it widens out into a bay. But entrances are all along the coast are dangerous, and Morro Bay entrance was dangerous because you had to come at a high tide if you had any draft at all. That is, if the boat had any depth to it. So that was my first experience of coming across a little bar in Morro Bay. And then the Army Corps of Engineers were already starting to build a breakwater over on behind the rock on the north side and revamped the entrance, because sometimes if you come the wrong tide, you had to wait outside. You couldn't get across that little bar. That now there's a big surfing thing there because they've let the sand build up over there. But at that time, it wasn't. Our little boats only drew 2 or 3 foot of water. There was one bigger boat that the Japanese people owned, and they had been just abalone divers, and they had a wide, beamy boat, and it probably drew 4 feet of water, and they would bring abalone into the harbor and process it down in the back, right on the edge of the cliffs down in the backside of the harbor. You know, they have to process it. They have to take it out of the shell and then slice it and pound it to make it tender enough to eat. So that was really a turning point for Morro Bay fisheries, because the Army Corps of Engineers put a breakwater in, and then finally a south breakwater. But the first couple of years, it was just the one on the rock side. And that little harbor began to flourish because now you could get bigger boats in and out, and the tuna would be offshore, and there would be boats as far as Seattle coming down here to fish tuna, and the harbor was deep enough for them. And they're deep draft boats because they fish Alaska, and a lot of the harbor entrances are the mouths of rivers and stuff as you get further north. And so Morro Bay began to flourish a little bit, and one of our acquaintances started a little store that sold fishing gear and lines and hooks and stuff, and he had been a fisherman for 2 or 3 years, and so that little store propelled him up to be the first mayor of Morro Bay.
Is that Joe
Giannini?
Yeah.
Have you heard of him?
I've heard of him.
Yeah. And his son Joey, he took over his dad's business after his dad got older and so forth. But Joey and our second son went to college together. Yeah. Yeah. And that was Cuesta College when it first, it was just Army barracks and stuff, and they used them for getting Cuesta College started. It was a junior college, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's been a really wonderful, wonderful life of 75 years of not having a job on land.
Yeah, sounds like a very great experience.
Pardon?
Sounds like a very great experience. Yeah.
Yes, and I had some good teachers, some wonderful people that recognized my anxiousness to raise a family and make a living off of the ocean, and gave me opportunities that I wouldn't have ever had as a farmer or as a butcher. You know, I was going to butcher school and thought that was going to be my vocation. Mm. And I did work in a butcher shop until the war started. And well, they were preparing for war, 1940, and that's when I got a job driving a bulldozer. Yeah.
What year did you come into Morro Bay?
Pardon?
Whenabouts was the first year you came into Morro Bay?
That was 42, I think, 1942. And then the fish moved a little south, and I came into San Luis, and it wasn't a port at that time. There was an old pier there, but a pier was run down, and the road going out to the pier was a railroad for going into San Luis Obispo, narrow gauge, and it went where those new homes are along the levee. Have you been to Avila lately?
I've been to Avila, yeah.
Yeah. Well, they got stop lights and stuff now, but when we came, it was just a run-down old pier over there, and the little pier, what they call a county pier, right at Avila, and that's where we unloaded fish, pull them up one at a time, you know, by hand, no hoist. And of course, there was the Avila Pier, we call Union Oil Pier, because the tankers would come in there. But there wasn't a good facility for unloading fish or taking care of fish. So what they did in the tuna season, they'd bring a truck with ice, and we'd pull them up by hand and put them in a little cart that was on a rail and push it off the pier, and then throw them up by hand into the back of the truck that had ice in it to take them to San Pedro, to the cannery. So everything was manual labor and pretty crude. And I saw the need for better facilities, but I didn't have any money. I had a little, by that time I had a little 28-foot boat, and another with a single cylinder engine. San Giuseppe was the name of it. But I sold fish to a fellow that had a little ice house that could hold fish. If they didn't have a truckload to go to the cannery, they would put it in that ice house. And that was one block off of the front street of Avila. And that man was Dick Kirby. When I later became better acquainted with Dick, and Gerard Parsons, who had a lumber yard in San Luis Lumber down on Lower Higuera. The three of us got our heads together and began to try to get some help to get that pier fixed up, And finally, after about, 5-6 years, going back and forth to Sacramento and legislators and down to Los Angeles to the land management, federal land management people, Bureau, Colonel Putnam. We finally got a few bucks to get a little work done, and then we put it to the county voters to get a harbor formed there. And the first time we had it on the ballot, and we failed. And the reason we failed was Morro Bay was now a good little harbor, and boats coming and going and unloading fish. Even during the war, in the about 46, a big minesweeper came in there, and they draw quite a bit of water. Probably have 20 men on them, and the minesweeper captain didn't have a knowledge of that entrance.
Was it the north entrance or the south entrance?
Pardon?
Was it the north entrance at that time or the south entrance?
Yeah, I don't hear very well, and the light behind you makes me.
Was it the north entrance or the south entrance at that time?
Yeah, by that time, all the breakwater, both breakwaters were in, the south one, and that ship should not have come in. That.
You need to wet your whistle.
Thank you, daughter. This is my first child.
Thank you. I'm fine. Thank you.
This is our first child, and this is our, sixth? And I have 2 more besides that.
Wow.
Plus 4 boys. My wife and I, she was only 16 when we married, and I was 19. And we were married 75 years.
Wow.
Before she passed away. Good health, good woman, hard worker, and imagine 8 children. Oh. And me going to sea all the time, building boats and getting better established.
And she got pretty sick.
So we were blessed, and I consider that a gift from God Himself to be able to have a family like we raised, and me going to sea. I wasn't just a fisherman. When we had kids going to college, I took a job as a tugboat operator for Standard Oil, and did that for a couple of years while I went to a Coast Guard school to get a bigger license. And that led me to a company that had ships worldwide, a company called Global Marine Exploration. And that company was formed by petroleum engineers, and they were from several different petroleum companies, oil people. They were smart, and I was lucky to get hired by them and begin to get some more smarts myself, and getting to go to Coast Guard school in my time off. The Standard Oil wanted me to get a license, and we worked 5 days on and 3 days off like that, and there were 2 crews or 3 crews, and we were putting those big oil tankers into berth, some of the largest tankers in the world. And you had to be pretty skilled to do some of the things that we had to do. But fishermen are, in the ways of the marine life, fishermen are pretty high up on the, And so I got a Coast Guard license and worked for Global Marine. And Global Marine had just done the Morro project, which is drilling through to the crust of the earth in 13,000 feet of water. No ship in the world had ever done that. Take core samples out of that depth, and these petroleum engineers were the ones that devised the method to do that, the very first. And I got to work in that company, so that elevated me. And the president and vice president of that company saw my potential, and they put me when I finally hired on to them. They put me in a good position to their original ship that they had converted for the Morro project. Gave me a job as captain of that ship, and there's a minimum marine crew because it's a drilling ship. It has a 90-foot tower and big equipment for drilling in the ocean floor and stuff. And so that allowed me to finish my Coast Guard licensing, and then they allowed me to train new seamen. A seaman starts out as an ordinary, and then the next class is AB, able-bodied seaman, and then you can graduate to third mate and second mate and chief mate and then captain. But it takes 8 years of going to sea to it. You have to have a year of a captain signing your year of sea duty to present to the Coast Guard before you can even study for the next step up. So I was sort of a teacher, trainer, comrade, but in charge of all the Marine. And it was, coming from a fisherman cranking a one-cylinder engine that didn't know anything about navigation or any. It was another step up the ladder for me.
And where was this? Was this in Morro Bay or was this in Avila?
Well, I still lived here in Avila, and we bought property in Grover. I think in 1958 or 59. So my home was right here in this county. But when I took the job I had bought property and had a little fish market down on Grand Avenue here in Grover, and thinking that anything happened to me, my family would have a way of making a living. Little fish market. And then when I took the job in Southern Cal, we moved to Redondo Beach, and I bought a house down there. And so but our hearts were still here. And I still had a little boat in the harbor here at Avila. Because Avila didn't have a bar to run. You could get across, come in and out of Avila anytime, but there's times that it wasn't wise to try Morro Bay, even with the new entrance. In fact, we lost several people on that bar at Morro Bay. One of them was a good fisherman. I'd known him for 25 years when his boat capsized. Fortunately, his two deckhands were his two sons, and they were on deck, but he was in the cabin coming across the bar, and the brake rolled the boat, and the back door to the cabin slammed shut, and he couldn't get out, so he drowned. But the two boys continued. They are now retired.
What was the name of that boat?
Um,
Was that Al's boat?
Pardon?
Al French?
Yeah, but the boat was named after the lobster.
Langostina?
Yeah, the Spanish name for lobster, I think.
Is that Langostina?
Langosta.
Langosta?
Pardon?
Langosta or
I think it
langostina.
was Langostina.
No, anyhow, that too is part of our history. You know, we've lost a lot of good friends,
And family.
but thank the Lord, we managed to get, and I even lost a boat in the breakers one time. But God has protected us and kept us, and our family has spread and grown, and now we have like 120 some offspring.
How has religion I talked with Jeremiah O'Brien, and he told me I spoke with Jeremiah O'Brien.
Oh yeah.
And he told me that you're a very religious man.
Yes.
And I wanted to ask, how has religion played a part in your career as a fisherman?
I'm not quite getting your question.
How has religion been a part of your life as a fisherman?
Well, my grandparents were Christians. Two of my aunts were missionaries, one to Africa and one to India. My family has been centered on Christ. I mean, as far back as I can trace, we've had Christian roots. And the faith in a God that loves me, that cares about me and directs my path, is, taught to me from the time I was at my mother's knee. And it has proven so valuable to my life, trusting a God that cares about each of us personally. And so, yes, I want to be, I want the other fishermen to know that the God I serve cares about each one of us, and that He is our Creator and our salvation.
Yeah.
talk about the silent hour?
I don't hear you.
Talk about the silent hour and what you did.
Oh, well, that isn't so important.
How you preached through the,
Well, I didn't preach to them. I just gave them examples, and the fishermen developed, and this is with the tuna fleet. I mean, small boats scattered all over the ocean. Some would be in California, and some would be in the Gulf of Alaska. But once we got marine radio, now we never got those until after the war. We converted ourselves government surplus to use as a method of talking to each other. Before, when I first started fishing, we all had a little
Megaphone.
tapered, cardboard tapered, and you'd get up there and you'd speak through that and, from the bow of your boat, and the other guy drifting there, and then he'd have one to put to his ear, and we'd talk to each other, and sometimes you wouldn't even get, because a lot of the fleet were of the fishing fleet along the coast. South in San Diego were Italian, the majority of because some of them knew navigation, and the big tuna companies could finance a boat and own the boat and send the boat to Galapagos Islands for a load of tuna, bring it back to San Pedro or San Diego. And there was canneries in those ports, and they had cheap labor. A lot of the people from different countries that had settled in U.S. And there were a majority were of the labor force for those canneries were Italian, but there were a lot of other nationalities that were immigrants, like from Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia and anywhere in Europe, and they would naturally gravitate toward where the job was, and those canneries that have 400 or 500 people working. So, but at San Diego, majority was Portuguese and Italian. The Italian fleet down there were mostly Sicilianos, and in Monterey they were Sicilianos. But over in Santa Cruz, where I began, they were Genovese from Italy, from Genoa. And they were a kind-hearted, soft-spoken, wonderful fellowship of people. So much different from their neighbors across that came from Sicily. They were loudmouthed and ready to fight at a drop of a hat. And so I was blessed to be amongst a family-loving, helpful group of people. Like 25 of us in that whole fishing town of Santa Cruz. But we looked out for each other, and that is my kindred. I mean, Christian people look out for each other. And so in the fishing fleet, after the war, and we got radios, we could talk to each other. I was again blessed by having a high school kid, neighbor, lived in Capitola, which is just 3, 4 miles, 5 miles from Santa Cruz. And he was interested in learning some of the marine problems and helping. So he and I went to the library at night when I was fishing local, not tuna fishing, just blackcod. We fish a line of hooks that are 3 foot apart on a heavy, in those days all cotton rope and manila. Cotton line and manila rope. And so that boy Tony said, "Come on, let's go." And we went to the library at night and we studied the Hertzian electric system and learned from that what it would take to reach the sine wave or the length of an antenna for the frequencies that the marine radios were. And on a ship, you have 2 masts and you have enough reach that you can put a whole wavelength in one antenna. But on a small fishing boat, you couldn't. So Tony and I devised a method of wrapping a quarter of a wavelength on a cane pole, just a bamboo pole, and hooking our radio to it and get an RF signal, radio frequency signal. And then we developed, and I'd say we because he was a lot smarter than I, and he pressured me, "We can do better, we can make this better," And so I began to help my fellow fishermen. And most of the engines in those smaller boats were all gasoline, no diesel. And a gasoline has spark plugs and a generator or something to keep the batteries up. And so you have interference that would come into your reception of a radio, a marine radio. So we developed a method of grounding that interception out. On the generator, we would, in those days, there were not alternators, they were generators. We would put a little condenser to ground, and that would get some of that, that spark plugs would make. And then as we developed, we learned that to get a better radio frequency output, that you need to have so much of, because you've got a length of wire to match the frequency of the crystal. And it was all crystals in those days, rock ground crystals, mostly from Arkansas, but even all the military aircraft and everything, they worked off of crystal. And this is before we learned to pick off the sine wave on the side of a signal. But we Tony and I developed a method of getting more of the RF frequency out by putting an induction above the center of the wavelength, and the wavelength is determined by the frequency. So we had only had the Coast Guard frequency at 2182, and 2670, and then we had 2638 and 2738. That's the frequencies. So we needed a method of covering those frequencies and getting the utmost out of it, because there might be somebody in San Diego wanting to talk to somebody in Columbia River, you know. And we developed that by the length of wire in the coil and the lead to that coil, and then the top of the frequency. We needed good amount of the RF frequency that would help to pull from that coil. You get better radiation. So we developed that where we could we lived right on the cliff in Santa Cruz, and so we had good marine environment right there, and that helped me to talk to guys in Seattle or off the Washington coast, and so I became acquainted with a lot of those fellas. And then I tried to present my life, my viewpoint with God to my fellow fishermen. I mean, if you have something that is so important in your life, you want to share it with other people. And so just by being an example, we got a good opportunity, and I have to tell you about it because it was developed by fishermen, this system. Every day at noon, we would declare a silent hour between 12 and 1, so that one person would have the whole coast to talk to. So everybody would just listen to 2638 for that hour, and we would all call in to the master of ceremony, whoever it was, maybe in the Arctic, Joe Giannini. He had a good radio. And the whole coast would listen, and they would tell what the weather was, what the water temperature was, what the size of the fish were, the number of fish they had caught for the morning. And and it would be brief, and then it'd go to the next guy and the next guy, and so that everybody knew what was happening in the whole fleet. And it was a wonderful opportunity for me to lift my faith amongst my fellow fishermen. And so that's probably what your friend was talking about when he said I was a deeply religious man. I wanted to share, and there are men now on this coast that I correspond with that were kids. One boy is only 15. He went to sea all of his life. His dad was a fisherman, and I correspond with him now about once a month. We talk or write back and forth. And he's retired seaman, 70-some years old, but he accepted what I was presenting way back when he was 15. He didn't want to be a fisherman. His dad had a small boat and a large family, and it was crowded, and so he got a job running a glass bottom boat down in Catalina Island, and from that That expanded, they've got a bigger boat. He had to get a Coast Guard license. If you take over 6 people, you have to. So he went to Coast Guard school, and then he decided so he got a job on a tanker and spent his whole life at sea. But he has a wonderful Christian wife and good Christian testimony. He writes encouraging letters, And in 1970, I was coming out of the Columbia River about 3 o'clock in the morning, and the tuna fleet was out. The salmon fleet along the Washington, Oregon coast was out. But I heard a voice calling my boat's name. And so I got there's a lot of people talking on there, giving positions and the amount of fish and so forth. And I heard this voice calling my boat. So I got a little clear spot, and I just picked up the mic and said, "Will the voice calling the Seattler please stand by? When I get a clear moment, I'll call you." And so I heard other guys say, "Hey, Travis has got a call. I'll call you back." And Eric Quentin down, and in about 5 minutes, I said, "Well," push the button and said, "Will the boat calling the Seattler come in now and make it brief? The air is real busy." And the voice came back over the radio. "This is a lucky strike, Travis. And I just wanted to tell you that Cicely and I and our whole family accepted Jesus Christ as Lord." Can you imagine what an encouragement that would be? If you're selling books to get through college or selling newspapers on the street, as I did when I was 10 years old, and you get that kind of a response. The whole fleet, probably 10,000 boats, hear him say, "We have accepted," and the whole family.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
Incredible story.
It was really a lift to me and to some of the other fellas that were on, tipping scale, so to speak. They'd go have a beer with a guy, but I've never smoked and I've never drank, so I don't mean that I'm above sin. I'm not. I'm as sinful as anybody, but God has forgiven me of my crazy sins, and my family will tell you, old Dad is not perfect, but I have had a good, perfect life, and I give God the credit for that. We've had the last boat I built. Well, I had fishermen help me. We built 3 boats right from scratch, and I've got pictures of them here. The last boat I built was, I spent $193,000, not counting my labor and my children's labor. Even this girl helped when I built the Seattler. She and Mother painted the inside of the boat while we have the forecastle, which is ahead of the engine room, and there's bunks in the forecastle, and then there's the engine room, and then there's the fish hole, which is the majority size of the boat. And the boat that she and Mother painted on the inside, and Mother wore a pair of red jeans for years after that had the paint buckets right on her seat because she stumbled. The boat is like shaped like that, and she stumbled and sat down on the white epoxy paint. and so the family helped me, and the fishermen helped me. I hired
We all went out.
knowledgeable fishermen, and we've got pictures of the Catherine. Yeah. This is the first boat we built, and this was in the Noyo River, and this is my wife, and here, this is when we were framing the boat right at Fort Bragg in the Noyo River, and then this is after 7 months after we started. You can see we're getting ready to put it in the water. We didn't have the engine in it. We had the propeller and shaft on. This is the finished product. And now there's a colored picture there of the Catherine with the drag gear on it. It's over there in that stack. Yeah, right on top. Yeah. Yeah, this is with all the gear on it and fishing, and that's this same hull. And by the way, it looks just as good today. It's fishing out of Crescent City. A fellow named Lauren Brown owns it, and he used to fish in Santa Barbara. Yeah, and that was the first one. And the Makala brothers, two Finnish brothers, Nick and Fred. Yeah.
The last of the Makala brothers just died, and they're closing that boatworks
This is before she was born.
just recently.
Yeah. Yeah. I think our youngest child at that time was our third child. So that's a few years ago. And the boat is fishing today, and it looks just as good. Lauren takes real good care of it, but he knows the family history too. Yeah, that's a good picture of it. When I first put the drag gear on it. Yeah. And brought it to Avila. Yeah.
Did you want to take a break right now?
Pardon?
Did you want to take a break?
Oh, no. I
going?
could talk all night.
Okay.
I hope you're not bored.
No, it's all very interesting.
The last, show the picture of the Bountiful. Yeah, that's a good one. This is the last one we built. We built that in San Luis Obispo.
It's where the Pacific Builders lot is, where Madonna Road and South Higuera meet. There's a T right there. You know that intersection?
Yeah.
And it's Pacific Home Improvement or something now, but that was an open lot, and Loomis Feed, I think, was there.
The San Luis Obispo terminal of that little narrow gauge railway that went out to the pier in Port Avila now. That terminal, the San Luis terminal, was the roundhouse where they serviced that little narrow gauge railway steam engine, and it was 8 foot of concrete because to run that heavy engine up there, they had to have pretty solid. Well, and they went way down on stairs underneath to service that steam engine. That piece of land I rented, and we built this boat on that land, and this boat weighed, without anything in it, just the steel, weighed the limit of the highway. And to show you how God works, the engineer that is over all of Caltrans for our district was right across the street from where I was building the boat. And his brother had started a steel boat up in Santa Rosa, just a salmon trawler, 45 foot long. But steel in saltwater has to be prepared a certain way or else it won't last. And because of my position with Global Marine, they had me officer in charge of marine inspection, so that every ship that Global Marine owned and every boat had to be put in dry dock, and I had to be there with my crew to make sure that it passed all the Coast Guard inspections. And so that meant all the through-hull fittings, strainers, and so forth, the valves that shut them off, everything to pass a Coast Guard or American Bureau of Ships inspection had to come under my tutelage. So I knew what to do when I built my own steel boat to protect it. And the chief of the Caltrans division brother was building a steel boat and didn't have any knowledge of what it took, what kind of paints and how, the progress that you made as you got ready to paint, like sandblasting and prime coats, and we put a coat on here called Met coat. It's the first that goes on, and it's so particular that we only sandblast 8 foot at a time, and then blow the dust off of that and put a coat of 2 mils only, 2 mils thick of the Met coat, which is a form of zinc that you can spray. But 8 foot, you stop, blow it down, and then paint it, and then go to the next 8, and you overlap a little bit. Well, I explained all that to this gentleman whose brother he was helping to finance. And then when it come time for me to move it, I had to have a Caltrans permit to take it on the highway.
From San Luis Obispo to Morro Bay, where it was launched.
So I went to him, and he came to me. He said, when you go to get your permit, let me set it up for you. And so he bought, when I was ready to try to get a permit to take it over the highway, he brought scales that I could put under the boat to get the weight of the vessel so that I could pass the inspection to take it to Morro Bay. Now that's not a coincidence, is it? That the chief of the area became a friend because his brother was building a boat out of the same kind of material that I was, and needed the knowledge that I had got through Global Marine as the officer in charge of marine inspection. God has worked things out for me all through my life. I didn't deserve it. I don't deserve his attention or direction. I'm just as mean as ugly as anybody. And my family would be able to tell you that. They've lived with me. But God has kept me and driven my path and exalted me amongst my fellow mariners, so that it sounds like I'm bragging, but I'm really bragging of what He has done for me in my life. Look at that vessel when I got it all finished. Now, when we moved it, we didn't have any engine in it, no propeller on it. We had a shaft because, you're going to put it in the water. You got to have no place to leak. And so it went in the water looking like this. I didn't even have all the paint on it, just what the Coast Guard required. The name and hail port, that's all.
My mom painted it that day.
The day it was put in.
Yeah, at daybreak. So they could only transport it at night on the highway because it had to go.
Yeah, you have a picture of the sea adler there?
I do. It could only go on the at night. I have one in my phone. And it took all night because they could just creep on the highway. And then at daybreak, they launched. Was that the public launch?
Huh?
The public launch
Yeah.
in Morro Bay.
Yeah. But the sea adler, you should have a picture of it.
Well, I have one I took back in the 70s.
Okay.
In Morro Bay. It's leaving the harbor. And my husband's aboard.
That's the next boat I built after the Catherine. And I had fishermen help me with that one. And this one carried 40 tons of fish. The Bountiful carried 60 tons.
Wow.
Yeah. And a spray brine refrigeration, which was a new system, spray brine. We mix salt water with salt until it would float a potato, and that way it won't freeze. And we can bring it down to 18 degrees below zero and still spray it as a liquid. And it'll go down over the fish and freeze them. And you circulate the same water. You put enough salt in it, and it won't freeze. And then as it comes down amongst the fish, it's almost like a fog. When you open the fish hole, you can't see down there because of that cold water. And a fish that weighs 20 pounds will, within 30 minutes, will be as hard as a rock. So it's nice and fresh, and we can keep them for months. And the cannery can operate even in the wintertime because they've got hard frozen fish, fresh fish.
The salt penetrates their flesh and makes it taste salty. But with albacore, their skin is tougher and they can withstand the salt brine.
When I got the second steel boat built, I leased to her and her husband, who was not a fisherman. He was a great guy and a wonderful Christian man. And they took the sea adler. Well, they had run a little wooden boat that we had leased first. And then they took the sea adler when they had a little baby, months old, and filled the whole forecastle, the front part where you sleep, filled all that with disposable diapers. and that lady now has her family, and she is a nurse also, like her mother, and a wonderful Christian, and she married a good Christian boy. Yeah, so And so that's the whole fishing fleet are brothers and sisters, and we look out for each other. You know, I can't tell you how many people came to my aid at different times. And then I was blessed to be able to work for a company that required a Coast Guard license, which I didn't have, but which they paid the tuition for. And then that elevated me to get a job with a worldwide company that had such good engineers that nobody had ever done what they did with their first ship. I have to explain it to you because nowadays it's a common thing amongst all the drilling ships of the world. But at that time, we never had what they would now deem a miracle. And, you know, it wasn't until NASA, our National Space, found a method of communicating with the people they were sending out into space. You couldn't do that with the old system. The old system, you took the peak of the sine wave, whatever that peak was, whatever frequency it was, but they could not go out into outer space and talk to by marine radio or any kind of radio. They were taking right off of the peak of you seen the sine wave of electricity. They were taking off the peak by grinding a rock crystal that matched the frequency. But they had no way of going beyond that. So they couldn't get out into space with that. They learned in the late 50s, early 60s, that you could come off of the side of that peak and pick off frequencies. The only problem was they were matched the depth of that sine wave, whatever they took off of, would only match the territory that the sine wave would be signaling to. So they could take like 25,000 or 30,000 or 35,000 or so forth. And the only people that could hear it was those that were in a certain area, so that they could talk to somebody if they put them into space. But with the old system, they couldn't. So they call this the single sideband, this method of radio transmission. When we got single sideband with only 5 watts, now before we were limited to a number of watts, but 100 watts, because we couldn't interfere with radio stations that were transmitting to the public worldwide, So now I can, with 5 watts, I talk to my friend in the Philippines, and it don't interfere with anybody between us and the Philippines. Or Japan, or Okinawa, or British Columbia, or United Kingdom. What a wonderful thing that our space people came across, and now they use synthetic. They don't even have to have a rock ground crystal to match the frequency.
Mhm.
And they had to develop that before they would be able to communicate with a man they put on out into space. They had to have a method to communicate. So what an age that we have lived in. What a wonderful, I mean, from a Model A Ford that you had to crank by hand or a Model T. Oh, it just blows your mind when you look back on it, like I can look back after 101 years. I'll be 102 in October.
Wow.
And my memory has been so good. I write poetry a lot. My girls have I got to recite one for you. We look out on the ocean as we walk along the shore. We can see to the far horizon, but beyond there's so much more. And in all of creation, in Mother Nature's treasure store, beyond our wildest imagination, there's so very much more. And it's true with God's love as He beckons from yonder shore, with forgiveness and peace and mercy and justice and so very, very much more. You see how that evolves? I mean, and so when I see people or talk with people, the love, the compassion, the joy of knowing someone else and the possibility of getting better acquainted, it just blows your mind. And so I write poetry that is amusing too, like this one is about grandmas. Before cell phones, grandmas used to sit and rock and knit and sometimes even babysit. But now the dear old soul is down at the gym, exercising, trying to stay trim, or out golfing with the in crowd and wearing slacks that are way too loud. Grandma. Mountain slopes grandma will never master. Her last ski trip was a fractured disaster. She's made friends worldwide on the internet. Doesn't tell them her age, I'll bet. We don't know what grandma's up to next. She may start dating the opposite sex. Nothing that we do or say seems to faze or stop her. All we know for sure, grandma's off her rocker. So it's not only entertaining to me, but to others, and it's amusing. Said, you know, your mom and papa probably told you about the birds and the bees. Oh, I wrote this poem about the bee. Said the he bee to the she bee, will you be my honey? Said the she bee to the he bee, you don't know what you're asking, sonny. For it seems the she bee has a mean old stinger smack dab in the middle of her fanny. Now, wouldn't there be an awful yap if a she bee sat on a he bee's lap? But there's none of that, you see, for when honeybees make love, they fly off up into the heavens above. They come down in a power dive, and only the she bee is left alive, the queen bee. Oh, thank you, Noah. for instead of going off on a lark, you obeyed God and took 2 honeybees on the ark. Otherwise, think what that would imply. No bee honey for you and I. So those are kind of goofy little poems. I got one there about age that I wanted to read to him. It should be under that top. Yeah.
Did you want to know about some of the people and structures?
You can read it for
Of
yourself.
Morro Bay? He knows a lot about the Brabs and
Yeah.
Burgess fishing.
Bergs. Yeah.
The grandson of the beginning of Burgess is a friend of ours.
Maybe. Yeah. It'd be good to know about that and maybe get in contact with them as well.
I'd be happy to put you in contact.
Yeah. Well. I guess going off on a different path here. I wanted to ask you about what did the harbor look like in Morro Bay when you first came in to Morro Bay? What did it look
Well,
like?
it was pretty much the same, but there weren't the Army Corps engineers built that first wharf there. I think it was called the Brebs Wharf because Brebs had a fish buying station there. And they built that pier and dredged the mouth of the jetty good, and it's been dredged a couple of times, 2 or 3 times since then. Then bigger boats carrying bigger loads of fish could come in. So Brebs put a pump on that first pier that was built, and that would be the furthest one inland. To suck sardines and wet fish, what we call wet fish, sardines, anchovies, all the fish that wrap with a net, you know. There's boats that carry 150 ton of wet fish, and they couldn't come in here. So they had to dredge, you know, the harbor to get it deep enough, and that expanded our reach into the fishing fleet. So now a different delivery was being made because we had deeper water, could be bigger boats. And as I started to tell you about that mine sweep, he should never have tried to come in. He was too big a boat for the depth of water we had and the break that was out in the harbor entrance that day. So when that 135-foot mine sweep came in, she took a big roll. The inclinometer said 40 degrees according to one of the men on the boat that I talked to. The mine sweeps were built with a sliding door at the back of the galley. You had hinge doors up forward at the wheelhouse, but back of it, and there's a long cabin because it had to seat 20 or 30 men to eat, and bunks and so forth. He should never have come in because the cook was standing in the door bracing himself, you know, holding on when they took that big roll, and that big heavy teak door slid and it cut his fingers off right at. And here they's coming in to port. You need all hands on deck. You need to be handling lines. There's a good tide that runs in in Morro Bay, and they were 5-6 hours, and they've got an injured man and blood streaming, and it was in November of 1946. The war had just ended, or was about to, and it wasn't a necessity to bring that vessel across that bar. You're putting all those men's lives at risk. But it was time for crew change. And there was a bunch of soldiers ready to go aboard that vessel when it got in and got fuel. And there was about 20 men anxious to get off. They'd been out doing maneuvers. So it was a mistake. And the reason I was even there, it was full moon. And full moon, you don't wrap fish. You can't. At that time, we didn't have electronic gear to show the schools of fish. The way we found a man stood up on the bow deck, holding on to the forestay to the mast, and stomp his foot hard like that. And if there's fish, they make a shine in the water because they're excited. They've heard a noise, and they all move, and it's luminous from the fish swimming. So you can, with a little patience, you can go around and find the size of the school and how big a raft to make, So it'd been full moon and windy, so all of our nets, purse seine type nets, we'd put out in the sand over where the stacks are now. That was all training ground for the signal corps. And so they had old telephone poles and stuff at different heights for the guys to jump over and pull up some webbing to get up to the top and go over, training ground. And so we, being a full moon and the wind blowing, we put our nets over those to dry, so that when we got back after the full moon, we were all from the Morro Bay area. We went home for the full moon. We're not going to be catching any fish, and the wind was blowing. So we got back, and we were there with shovels, shoveling sand to find our nets. The wind had blown across that north of the rock, and blown sand and covered our nets. And we were there shoveling sand and trying to find our nets and get them mended and back onto the boat. It's going to be dark now. We're going to be able to fish some more sardines and anchovies and smelt and wet fish. And so that boat should never have come in with that harbor like that. And it's only non-knowledgeable, non-seaman that would attempt it, It shouldn't have even tried that, but that man lost his fingers.
What was the Embarcadero and the piers and everything like prior to the war, if you were there? Like how did the war change what the wharf or the waterfront of Morro Bay looked like?
Well, if I'm hearing your question right, You mean the war and the fishing industry?
How did the war change the waterfront of Morro Bay? Like the
I'm gonna.
How did the war change the waterfront in Morro Bay?
Oh well, prior to the war, the back end of the bay wasn't dredged real deep. Of course, the bar was shallow too, because we came in on the north side. But that back half of the bay wasn't used by anything but the Japanese abalone divers. You know, there was only like 2 families that weren't Japanese that were diving for abs, and the Japanese were back in the back part of the bay, and they only had 1 boat that was deep draft. The abalone diving at that time were usually small boats, 25-foot, shallow draft, and the Japanese were skilled at navigating that entrance to the harbor. But at that time, it was on the north side of the road. There was one Monterey type boat. I had a Monterey type boat, 28 foot 9, a single cylinder, hand crank.
Double enders that pointed at both ends.
Those little boats, some of them, Japanese had little Japanese air-cooled engines and not much draft. They didn't draw much water, and they were skilled at handling those boats. And I had a lot of respect for them.
Dad, did the Japanese abalone fishermen, were they interred? Did they have to go to the prison camp?
Well, being radio stations and everything, even the automobiles, we were forced to tape the headlights on our cars. And all we had was a little like that, so you could see the other car, but it didn't illuminate. If you hadn't seen that little square, you could have hit that car. But the headlight, that was required. Anybody along the coast, because we were trying to have our safety and still operate, So a little Japanese sub came up down by Santa Barbara, just above Santa Barbara, and fired on oil facility there. And another one sank a Union Oil ship right below San Simeon. There, what was it? I forget the name of it.
The Montebello?
Pardon?
Montebello?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And I fished around it because rock had come to a structure like that, and they were on the side of a canyon, so I could, because we have good fathometers now and pretty precise navigation equipment, we had to learn to navigate with a sextant. I still have my Plath. Plath is probably like the Cadillac of all sextants, and I still have mine from when I was sailing ships. But at that time, we'd had another Japanese had fired on just south of the Columbia River up in Oregon. They had fired on some bunkers that the government had built there. So, everybody was tense. People were, afraid that we were going to be overrun. And the first year, I was ready to join the service. I tried to join the Coast Guard. I signed up, and then when I came home, my draft board said, "You can't join. You're in an essential industry producing food for 5,000-6,000 people, soldiers a day. So you got to come back to this, and you're going to stay at this until the war is over." So I had gone to Coast Guard Island, Alameda, in the Bay Area, and joined the Coast Guard, and they were sending me to Cape Farragut, no, Lake Farragut, up in Oregon, to Officers Candidate School. I had enough sea experience, and I could box a compass and navigate with a chart, and so they thought they could use me. They took me right from here to there, and then after a couple of weeks, when I got leave, I came home, and that's when my girlfriend and I got married. And she was 16 and I was 19.
Where did we get fuel? Where did we fuel in Morro Bay?
Well, the Standard Oil out in Brebs. Yeah. But that was long after the war had ended. The first fuel that I remember was they had a little place they could lift small boats, and they had a tank for fuel there. Yeah. And it was all gasoline.
Do you remember there being many processors, like seafood processors in Morro Bay? Or was that all, shipped to San Pedro or north?
Well, at that time, I don't remember, because we shipped our wet fish to Moss Landing to Joe. Anyhow, the processing plant that competed with the Monterey sardine industry, that they had 3 canneries over in that little, but you couldn't come into the harbor with fish because there wasn't enough water. So they had a short pier out there, and we would, outside of the pier, they had a big receiver, and you braille the fish off into that receiver, and it's hooked to a pipeline that comes ashore, and then have a ladder that they go up to drain the water out, and then dumps into a big, and that's the way they weigh them.
Was that in Morro Bay or Avila?
Well, the first ones that we worked with were up in Monterey Bay, Moss Landing, but then they put one on Brebs Dock here in Morro Bay about 1940. I don't remember exact year, but in the 40s they put one, but they didn't have one yet in 46. 46 we put the first one in Avila, over at the old dock port, and we didn't have a harbor district then. We didn't get a harbor district form until 54. we finally got harbored. And I was one of the, well, there was three of us, as I mentioned before, Dick Kirby and Gerard Parsons that had the lumber yard in South Higuera, and myself, and we were, and we didn't have any money for anything. My wife was the secretary that kept the notes of the meeting, and we had 2 meetings a month. Nowadays they have one about every 3 months. But look at the harbor at Port San Luis now. We've got a nice boatyard. We've got a nice parking lot. A lot of good facilities. Some good restaurants. You couldn't even drive out on the pier when I first came here. In fact, first year I was here, Filipino man and his wife were fishing on the pier, and they had a dispute. They always had a few beers, I think. They had lanterns down close to the water, and they got in an argument, and she was going to walk back to Avila. You couldn't drive out here, you had to walk. And out to the third pier. And she fell through the dock and drowned. And we were going fishing in the morning, and one of the local fishermen was lowering his skiff, and I was getting ready. My helper Johansson and I getting ready to put our skiff in, so we'd go out to the Catherine, and he called back and he said, I see something floating and it looks green. And he rowed out toward it. It was on the other side of the pier. He rowed under the pier and went over. And then he hollered back, hey, there's a woman floating and she has a green sweater on. Call the sheriff. We had a buying station right above where we hoisted the skiff and unloaded the fish. So my helper went up, Johansson went up and called the sheriff, and the sheriff in the corner came out. The lady had been arguing with her husband and was going to go back to town, and that pier was so rotten, and it belonged to a private party. It didn't belong to a harbor district. You know, we would have been sued for everything, you can imagine. But this Filipino man never reported his wife missing, because when they'd have an argument, sometimes she'd go to somebody else's house and stay for a week or two. So they didn't know for maybe a month who it was that drowned, but she had her name on her wedding ring. When they take the wedding ring off, they found out the last name, and then they chased it, and it was somebody that they could locate, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But that's how decrepit that old pier was. You didn't want to walk out there at night. There's no lighting. They had lanterns. Lower the lantern down to get the fish to come.
Was that the San Harford Pier?
Yeah.
Or that's not the Harford Pier.
Harford.
Yeah.
Pier. What we call the third pier.
Third Pier. Okay.
Yeah. The Harford Pier.
Yeah.
Yeah. Third pier.
Yeah. We call it the third pier. And we would tie our little boat, the little monorays and a little abalone boat, tie them to the county pier, drop an anchor back in and tie, at a ladder, so you go up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting and educational for me. I was just, 20-year-old boy. It was a real education.
This is a picture of a giant squid that he caught that was in the San Luis paper. And it was 14 feet long. And my mom measured it by the old pier with the planks on the pier. Walt
Wow.
Disney sent his artist to draw it, and it was the model for 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea movie.
Disney, like Disney.
Walt Disney, yeah, the Disney.
Wow. So the boards back, that's on the pier.
So this is the body, what they call the mantle,
Mm-hmm.
and that was 7 feet, and then the tentacles were 7 feet.
Yeah, they sent people up from Hollywood to get pictures of that because they were making that movie, you know, the movie 20,000 Leagues or something. They were making that movie, and Walt Disney sent people. They saw in our Telegram Tribune a picture that was of that big squid. That thing was
82 pounds.
Wow.
Yeah. And my
And
husband caught one also. Same
so they-
size, but
Was that?
much later at
Oh.
Port Similis.
Wow.
they call
Was
the
that in 54, I think, or something.
54?
54. Was that in 1954? And then my husband
I'm not
caught one
sure.
in the 80s.
I'm not sure. Disney Studios could tell you. But anyhow, they're the ones that the Tribune had printed that and wrote the story about us bringing that. Nobody had ever seen a squid that big. And so Disney sent some engineers up and took pictures and measurements, and I didn't talk to them. I was out fishing again the next day. So, you know, when you're buying a new boat or paying for a new boat, you work every day. That first year, I lost 34 pounds.
Working on the boat.
Well, in those days, we didn't have hydraulics. So we had a boom and a capstan. You wrap your line around the capstan and goes through a block up here, down to a hook here, and you put the hook around the webbing and bring it up, tie it off at the rail, stack it so it can go back out again, and pick up the next section, and it takes 3 or 4 sections before you get to the fish. You know, 3 or 4 lifts. So it was hard work. I lost a lot, and I was trying to pay for a new boat.
Were there many regulations on catch limit or size when you started?
Not nearly as many. The main regulation that I remember was because I went to Sacramento to speak to the legislators, to the drag boats, the boats that dig a big net and drag it along the ocean floor, weren't restricted by the size of the mesh. And you know, some of those Italians had little small webbing, and you're getting a bunch, and they have 3 or 4 men on deck shoveling overboard the fish that weren't big enough to process, which is a waste. And so when they started trying to restrict the size, a lot of the drag fishermen, men that drug a net on the ocean floor, had 4 or 5 men, and most of the product that they were bringing up was being put back dead, and that's not right. I mean, you're working against your future if you do that. So I was dumb enough to go to Sacramento and say, if you're going to cut the size, don't give us a great big size. Let us have enough size fish that we can peddle them, but not so small that we're wasting the resource. And it finally made sense. But the Italians, especially the Monterey guys, I was fishing on the Santa Cruz side, Genoa. The Monterey guys especially were really upset. And they are Sicilianos. They'll cut their brother's net if it's bothering them, or their fishing gear. If I would not have slept aboard my boat, they would have come aboard the boat at night, because I had protested against cutting the size beyond edibility or feasible, but went along with the fishing game that we should cut the size of the webbing down. And I had webbing that was only 3-inch. But really it should have been 4.5, So we finally got that done. And there's a few fishermen that agreed with that, but a lot of them, especially the ones that had big companies like Alex Palladini Company, they had 5 or 6 boats with probably 20 men in their work fleet, and they were headquartered in East San Francisco Bay. They had a lot of attorneys and people lobbying, and I was speaking against what they were. They don't cut. We have men that can, but it was foolish, and I was probably pretty foolish to go against them. So they would have did harm to my gear or my boat if I wouldn't been vigilant,
And you had shots fired over your bow, right?
No. I had guys with shotguns standing on the bow, pointing it across my bow, and they weren't. I don't think they would have ever pulled the trigger, but I didn't give them reason to. I'd turn and give them room, and so I wasn't in any danger. I knew I wasn't in any danger. I had worked with those people. They couldn't have gone fishing, some of them, without citizenship. And I had gone aboard and worked as what they call mechanista. And I was the engine room man. And you had, in those big purse seiners, when you're bringing small webbing and you're bringing sardines and anchovies aboard, a lot of water comes with it, because you're booming that big sack of fish, maybe 10 ton, up like that, and it's running water, but they bring it over the fish hole and drop it, and the water goes in the bilge and has to be pumped out. So they have to have someone that's knowledgeable to keep those pumps running. Otherwise, the boat would sink. So I was sort of a help to that fleet that was, and so they're not going to shoot me. I would go and work with them during the dark of the moon, and then I'd go back to longlining in the, whenever weather would let me in. So we recognized that they had a problem, they had a say, they just had come from a country that didn't restrict you.
But as you know, as you fished more, how did regulation play into what you were catching? Did they start increasing or limiting size limits, or preventing the catch of a certain species, or preventing trawling, or things like that?
Well, trawling, which we call drag fishing, uh, has always been very productive. And they had 2 or 3 men that, you're checking the size of the fish and throwing a shovelful overboard and putting a handful. And it's a waste. And some of them had come from a different country that had different methods and different potential. It wasn't feasible to people that had been catching and keeping to throw half of them back. And so anybody that purported that or tried to help to get a size limit became your enemy, even if he was your friend. You follow me? And some of the Sicilianos in Monterey, and I worked with them. I know what they're thinking is. They would, if their cousin caught more salmon that day, they better have somebody on the boat that night because somebody had come and cut their lines. And
But that, in terms of regulation, you had to report how much you caught of different species, and you had limits.
well, at one time we didn't have to. We didn't have to keep a log. Back in those days, we didn't even if we caught, during the war, anything we caught was saleable. But it wasn't feasible to sell a little codfish like that when you put him back in the water and he's going to grow like that in a year, And so we that were fishing with hook and line, we could just trip that fish with our gaff hook. Instead of hooking him, we could hook the hook and trip that fish, and he'd go back and swim and grow bigger. But the market's not going to buy something that's like that anyhow. And the best fish has got some length and meat to it.
More yield. If you have higher yield, less bone and skin and waste, then you're paying less labor. So it takes a lot more labor to fillet or to process a small fish than it does a larger fish.
Mm-hmm.
So plus it protects the young so they can grow up and become big.
Right. When did you notice? When did you notice that regulation was starting to hurt the fishing industry here in Morro?
Well,
or did it?
The Fish and Game Commission were open to the public to have a chance to say something in their meeting. And it evolved over the years that the people that were in the sport fishing business, and there's hundreds of boats from Santa Barbara to San Diego alone, and a pretty good fleet out of San Francisco, sport fishermen. They began to get those sport people on the advisory committee, and it made a difference because they were the sports-minded people were critical of what we were catching and processing, and so the pendulum swung at the meetings. It swung toward the sport fishing industry instead of just the commercial. And so it all came down to, finally it became national marine fisheries. That means it was regulated by the federal government, not just the state. And so I was elected to that board, and I served two-year terms on that board. They like to change them out pretty often, so you don't get just one viewpoint. So I served my two-year terms, and they had a big dinner and spend thousands of dollars for everybody that serves their term. That they wouldn't. I didn't go to my retirement dinner. I felt that they were spending money that should be used for better purposes than just to honor somebody that is willing to serve. I didn't even go. But I served on the advisory board for the Morro Bay Sanctuary, and they invited me to my dinner from that Morro Bay Sanctuary board, and Bill Clinton was present, and he was going to speak that night, and I said no. Clinton failed our nation with his sinfulness, is all I can call it, with an intern. You've heard that history, I'm sure. So I wasn't going to honor him by being at my retirement dinner.
And now, how is it regulated? How much more is it regulated now?
Well, they continue to try different methods, but the National Marine Fisheries Board is, I think, a little better system than just the state had, because we don't have as many. We have all the National Marine Board is by area, so we have all the West Coast as one board, all of Alaska as another board, and then so forth. So there's a board for the Gulf Coast, a board for the middle, and then a board for the North Coast. I think there's 8 or 10 fisheries board, because there's different needs. The people in Maine would never have the need that the people in Southern California or even California would have in their regulation, because of the the types of fish that are either traveling through that area and being caught, or are dominant in that area, live in that area. So I'm glad to see and that's why I volunteered to serve on that board. And it was, I lost a lot of fishing time. You go and be a week in a meeting, so you're not producing. But there's a lot of other good fishermen that did the same thing. They would volunteer or be drafted, or allowed to be drafted, as I was. And I think having a broad perspective of the entire industry of that area, it's helpful to have the advice or the ad lib of someone that's been there working that same. They had a big party for me at the aquarium at Avila. You probably read about that. And I didn't deserve that big honor, but I went and spoke about the changes that I've seen and the good things that were happening in our industry and in our area. And I still feel like 75 years gives me a little bit of a step up as far as giving advice, And I gave my dragger to my grandson, and he's doing good with it. And I'm hoping that he'll be able to raise a family, and that's her son. And
halibut fisherman.
Yeah.
Operating at it here?
Port St. Louis.
Okay.
The Lucy halibut.
Show a picture of the.
We have the Luciel.
The Luciel.
So he's regulated on mesh size. Danny's regulated on mesh size, where he can fish, but not really quantity, only the size of the fish, correct?
Yeah, well, that regulates the quantity.
Yeah, because you can only catch the big ones.
26.
He fishes majors on halibut. That's his main fish caught. And we put back 2 smaller fish and fish that are not as marketable. Halibut is pretty much in demand. Halibut and salmon are the 2 highest demand on the West Coast. But no salmon season last year or this year. But
what about incidental catch? Can he sell some incidental catch?
We can catch all of the sole family, but the habitat more or less regulates us, not the government, because halibut live in depths of California halibut, they live in depths that are not too deep, and they spawn in close to shore. We're not allowed to go within 3 miles of shore. We can't fish within 3 miles of shore. We have a mesh size that we have to adhere to. When I build the nets, and I still build them for him, for my grandson, they have to be California regular 4.5 inches between the knots, so the smaller ones can go through. If we get a smaller fish that's alive, he goes back overboard. We have a deck hose pumping 1.5 inch salt water on deck all the time, and we have a container there. Even if you're busy and you can't measure, those that you look might be doubtful, you put them in that salt water until you get the net back fishing again, and then you get the measurement, and they're still alive, you put them back in the ocean. Yeah.
And he has to take a scientist on board.
Yes, the National Marine Fisheries require you to have a scientist to measure and check what you are doing. And there's one assigned to the Morro Bay area. Then he comes, he tells you when he's available. We have to take him any time that he's calls and asks, and we have to check with him ourselves. If you don't call, we call him. And so but he's come aboard so many times in the last 10 years. He can see what my mesh size is. He might make one day with us out of the month, and he knows what we're catching. He knows our gear, our area that we fish. So we're never bothered. If you are honest and straight, you're not going to be pestered. I've had fishing game boats come alongside and offer me a hot meal. Really, bring their little patrol boat right alongside and come on, we got hot roast beef for you, Travis. They're not bothering me because we have a reputation. We're not going to cheat. We want that industry to continue for the young people, for the future.
And do you think there is a possibility of the continuation of commercial fishing here, or has it declined too far from?
I don't think that you can fish that ocean dry, if that's what you mean. There is such a bountiful, and they are not giving one baby at a time. They may have 1,000 in one spawn. So I don't believe that we're harming the industry, and I think our regulations are such that it's there won't be a decline. There can be ups and downs, as there's going to be in anything. Everything's not going to just stay on the same level. There's going to be years when they don't spawn as many, and there's going to be years when we don't catch as many. But we're very well regulated. Right now, the Fish and Game Commission is deciding some areas of fishing and some methods of fishing that they might try to regulate. But they have done a pretty good job, considering, California's population is pretty thick, pretty heavy. And I don't blame them. I love living here. This isn't my home. I live over there a couple of miles. But California is a lovely place to live. And we have enough agricultural land and enough. We got 1,000 miles of shoreline here that we can fish. And I fish clear to Alaska.
But the economy really affects us. So the cost to fuel the boat and go out and maybe not catch anything can limit the industry. So there's other economical reasons that it's probably a dying industry, wouldn't you say, Dad?
Yeah, the economy as a whole, but because of Morro Bay and Avila having two decent ports and good, honest buyers, and a group of fishermen that have fished for years and know that if we don't obey nature's laws, we're not going to have an industry. So we've got a good bunch of guys, and some of them are working at a real handicap because of some of the regulations. I want to give you an instance. With my bigger boat, I was producing 1,000 to 2,000 pounds of rock cod a day. And as a bycatch, I was getting maybe 100 pounds of deep water prawns. They're the shrimp family, that they're big, 10 to 16 to the pound. And when the regulation came down, if you hadn't delivered so many pounds of prawns in a 2-year period, you weren't allowed a permit to fish prawns, even though I had been fishing them and producing with them as a bycatch and had a record of it. I hadn't produced enough quantity in the last 2 years because I was concentrating on a different fish. The abundance of fish determines what you're going to be working at. And we have found a bank offshore here that lies right along a deep canyon. And there is a species of sole that lives in those canyons that had never been sold and processed before because we didn't have the technology or the gear or the demand for that particular sole. And so I was targeting on Dover sole instead of rockfish and prawns. So that 2-year period left me without a chance to go fish prawns, though I know where they are and there's plenty.
Did the closure of the RCAs affect you?
Pardon?
Did the closure of the RCA, the Rock Cod Conservation Area, affect you?
Well, it affects all the fishermen that the ocean has makes demands on you. And the product of the ocean sort of controls where you fish and so forth. So if there is a demand from the market for Dover sole over rock cod, you'll miss a lot of the rock cod fishing just to go for the dovers, though.
Well, there was closures recently. I think maybe in the 2000s of a rock cod conservation area where you weren't allowed to fish for rock cod in a certain amount of fathoms. Did that affect you, or is it?
It does affect where you're fishing. For instance, I produced tons and tons of rock cod, and it was there for me anytime I wanted to go. And there was other people fishing rock cod too out of Morro Bay, and then the market opened up for Dover sole, which we used to not even pay attention to. They just went back in the ocean. The market opened up for them, and the amount that you could produce physically, I mean, and it wasn't controlled by any uh, fish and game or federal law. You could produce all you wanted. And with my method, the method of fishing that we have, and the way our gear works now, you don't need a large crew. So if you don't have to share with somebody else, you got a chance to make a little more money.
Danny works by himself, my son. This is about 10,000 pounds of rock cod that my husband caught in one tow. That was in 1982. My brother fished rock cod out of Moss Landing, and he could catch his monthly quota in 3 hours. But a scientist went out and didn't catch anything because he didn't know what he was doing. And so they made the limits based on his research, which wasn't what a true fisherman, my brother could do his whole month. He'd fish for 3 hours and then he'd be done because he couldn't catch, wasn't allowed to catch anymore. But the fish were there. Just the scientists didn't find them. Doesn't mean that they weren't there. So yeah, it has affected us.
My boys all got a boat. All the boys that wanted one, I bought a boat for the brother she was just talking about, and for his younger brother, and I even gave him the Bountiful. He ran the boat. I kept all the boats in my name because they could run the boat and have all the proceeds. All I needed to do is be able to control that boat and license so that there was a chance of some of them, my other children or grandchildren or great-grandchildren, So I kept all the boats in the Evans family trust. But show them a picture of
There's the trolley. My brothers sold their boat to the state. They can never be fished again. So the state has a buyback program. And now the drag licenses, the licenses in order to fish are worth, the licenses to drag are worth more than the boats. You can sell your dragging license for more than you can sell.
Give me a picture of the sea adler. Do you have a good one there? I want. Well, I have one in there.
I didn't see it. The Bountiful. I don't see the sea adler, Dad. There's a Lucy. Sierra Madre. Saturnia.
I had so many boats, you have to look through a catalog here.
Did you say it was your husband or your brother that sold the boat?
Both of my brothers sold their boats back to the state in the buyback program.
To the federal government.
Yeah.
And that was early 2000s or 2008-ish?
When did Tom and Phil sell the boats? When did they?
Oh, it was. I don't know when the buyback program, I don't remember. Yeah, this is a picture of the Sea Adler. And she and her husband ran that boat. I owned it, but they.
He built that one. That's a 56-foot steel boat that he built, and we fished a wooden boat, albacore fishing, prior to that, but we just leased it out of Moss Landing, and then we ran the Sea Adler. Then we bought drag boats. We bought the Corsair, which was a big anchovy seiner out of Santa Barbara that had been converted into a drag boat. And then we sold that, and he leased a boat called the Umpqua City, and ultimately lost his life on that boat. So there's a big cost to being a commercial fisherman these days.
That was recent.
That was in '93. He died in '93. Yeah.
And this is a 60-foot boat that I owned, and it was a dragger also. It was called the Charlie.
I think you sold the Sierra Madre, right?
Yeah.
The Sierra Madre can't fish anymore.
This is another dragger that I bought for our second oldest son, Tom. And this boat is named Sierra Madre. And it was built by the same boys that helped me build the Catherine, the Macala brothers, in Canoyo River. So I've owned quite a few different boats.
Yeah, quite a lot. What would you say are some of your most memorable moments in fishing?
Most memorable was when I was shipwrecked. You'll never forget that. Yeah, I lost a rudder down off of Point Conception in the middle of the night. And and I was tired. I'd been working for that towboat company, and I'd worked a 5-day period, and I had 3 days off. So I drove up to get my boat, which was in the boatyard in Morro Bay, and a little small boat, the Kettenberg, what they call the Kettenberg. That's a manufacturer in San Diego, and I hadn't slept for hours. And when I lost the rudder, I was down off of Point Conception, ways offshore, at 3 o'clock or so in the morning. So I took the mattress out on the deck. I was alone and tired, dead tired. Took the mattress out on the deck, and the boat drifted inshore, and I was in the breakers when I woke up. So I knelt on the deck and said, "Lord, what do I do now?" And he gave me a quick answer. "You crazy fool, put on a life jacket." So I put on I put on a life jacket, and the next thing you know, the boat hit the surf and rolled. And so I jumped over into the water, and I don't swim, but it was shallow enough. I had been just sleeping on deck with my clothes on and my tennis shoes even, because I didn't plan to sleep any length of time. But because I'd been on duty working, handling ships, and then drove all the way to Morro Bay to pick that boat up, and then started down the coast without any rest. It was foolish, but God saved my life. I was able to walk a couple of miles to a farmhouse at back of Vandenberg Air Force Base, and this kindly lady took me in and made a lunch for me, and we had prayer together. And before I left there that afternoon, my wife, I called her, and she drove up from Redondo Beach to get me, because I'm on land now and I don't have wheels. She came up to get me, but by me visiting with that lady that day, she gave her heart and life to Jesus.
Our church filmed.
I would lose every boat I ever owned if I could see one person come to Jesus over that loss. So, and to tell you the end of that story, her husband worked for the company that, two ladies that owned that big ranch, and the government leased part of that ranch, and that's where Vandenberg. Her husband wasn't home. I didn't get to talk to him. My wife came from Redondo and with my daughters and took me back, and I went back to the tugboat again, minus my fishing boat, but with my life. A couple of years later, the oldest daughter, the one that you first met here, Eileen, was a teacher in Lompoc, and I was invited to speak to a group of people that she knew, and some of them were from our church affiliation. And there was an airplane pilot, a major or something, in connected to Air Force Base, also spoke. And when he finished speaking, I spoke first for a half hour, then he spoke for half an hour. So, and he spoke of some perilous times in his life and how God had saved him. That lady that had harbored me, taken me, a wet soggin that walked 2 miles to the farmhouse, her husband was in that group, and he accepted Jesus because he had been 2 or 3 months or 6 months talking to his wife about Christ and God and so forth. So, two people came into the kingdom because of an air pilot and a fisherman. I don't know your depth of love and so forth, but to me, that's worth living. To have people that are now 75, 80 years old that came into a lifetime of good living because of your testimony. And that's all it is. I don't have anything to offer anybody except what I've experienced. And it has made a difference. Not just in, but even a shipwrecked old fool like I I should never, I know better than to lay down, but I was so tired and had to get back to the job, and I needed to get the boat home. Crazy. But God has been so good to me, I cannot help but write about what He has done. So I write a lot of poetry now, and I try to edify Him in my life and in my poetry and in my daily existence. How many guys would start out life at 19 years old and live to be 101 or 2? Not many. And go to sea. I've never had a job on land since I was 19. And I've taken ships as far as the North Sea. Worked for a company that, excuse my tears, but I'm emotional. I worked for a company that were willing to try things that had never been done before. These petroleum engineers, Continental, Union, Shell, Superior, Standard, all put together a dynamic positioning thing that the whole world is using now. We drilled the Morro project in 13,000 feet of water. You can't anchor a ship in that depth of water and stay in a 25-inch hole. And how did they do it? You know, nowadays we have satellites and we can do a lot of things that we couldn't. But back in 1957, they bought some surplus outboard diesel motors and put them at 50 degree and 40 degree and 40 degree and 50 degree bow and stern, and then put a huge big steel plate on the ocean floor with a transponder to send a signal back. And that signal helped us to keep those 8 motors positioning that ship so that we could go in and out of that same hole.
You're moving this way and this way and this way. It's not just a single dimension like a car.
You know, the ocean has waves and swells and wind, and we were able to do that. Sponsored by Woods Hole, Massachusetts, and Lyndon B. Johnson, our president. From a fisherman, you know, I wore rubber boots and torn clothes. And God allowed me to be a part of all of this. Great.
What was the strangest thing you brought up from the bottom?
Pardon?
What is the strangest thing that you ever hauled up from the bottom?
Oh, I think it might not have been strange, but it was dangerous. We picked up an old mine that had been left in our net, and we picked it up in the net. And when we dumped it out on deck, and it was nighttime, and we're just using, 12-volt lights, it looked pretty scary. But it was there amongst the fish. And I had 2 crew members, and one of them still living, and we just talked to him a couple of days ago. When I dumped it on deck, they said, "What's that?" And I said, "That's a mine." And they ran to the bow of the boat. And we had fish all on deck, So I grabbed a line right quick and put it around the rail on the one side of that steel boat and wrapped it on there so it couldn't move. around a bunch of slimy fish and tied it to the other rail, 16 feet apart, and headed out where the boat wouldn't put the boat on a course. It wouldn't be doing this, it'd be more like this. Till I got way out deep where nobody ever fishes. And then I cut the ropes loose and pushed it overboard. We have a hole in the stern at the deck, and so our net and stuff can come in aboard. So I just rolled it out that, turned the boat around, went back to the fishing ground. The crew came off the bow. I said, "Come on back, guys." What great story, great life, Yeah.
My son says that he's cleaning the ocean one toe at a time. So he gets all kinds of trash, plastic, metal, you name it. And he has to, diapers, all sorts of things that he has to clean out of his net every day. But we get some good relics. We had some old Navy dishes and things like that. Some crock pots before, when they were really crock, not the electric kind.
Yeah, the first old fisherman that I joined up with, they only had one leg. He was such a gentle, kind old man, and knew how dumb a 17, 18-year-old boy from the farm would be compared to what he was doing. And he was so kind. When I refused, I wasn't even going to take his boat out the next day by myself. He said, "You got the spunk, I've taught you, you can do it." And so I went the next day and proved him right. Had exactly the same poundage of tuna and delivered that night, by myself. It really elevated my sense of worth. If your teacher tells you something and you're able to follow that and solve that problem, that teacher means a lot to you. And so that fellow and I became partners and bought another boat. And when he retired, I bought his half of that boat and then took the money from what I made and sold that boat for to build the Catherine, that 45-foot boat named after my wife, and then kept feeding the family, having more children, and God was in the midst of it all. I just can't praise him enough, and I believe that kind of success has influenced an awful lot of young fishermen and some of the older ones.
It's a great testimony.
Yeah, and one of the fellows that worked for me at one time got hurt on the boat and sued me for $300,000 and for $1,200 a month for the rest of his working life. And we were in court in San Luis Obispo at the courthouse, and the judge called both of us into his chambers and talked to us and tried to get us to reach a settlement, and he wasn't willing to settle. His attorney wasn't willing, and the suit was for $300,000 plus $1,200 a month, which he had been making on my boat for the rest of his life, working life. And the judge said, you can't talk to each other, go through your lawyers. But I felt such empathy for that man that when we and my lawyer came out of the courthouse, his lawyer and he were standing at the top of the steps, those concrete steps at San Luis Courthouse. I could not help but go and put my arms around him. The lawyer got back like I was going to hit him. But I put my arms around him and I said, regardless of how this comes out, I love you and God loves you. That man is now retired and not too healthy. Not from what he did on the boat, but his life prior to working for me. His father, who I had helped, he was on a ship that I was attached to. His father called me and said, can you do something for my son? He's such an alcoholic that he's lost his driver's license, and the company that he is working for has fired him. His wife is threatening to leave him. Well, come to find out, they weren't even married. They were just living together, and she had a small child by another man. So I told him I'll do what I can. I had a prior employee that had been an alcoholic, and we managed to get him into Alcoholics Anonymous, and he got his life straightened out. So I called him and I said, Wayne, can you do anything about an alcoholic? And he said, well, AA helped me. Maybe I can introduce him to. And so he took it under his wing, and he lived locally. And so that man had been working for me, and then 7 years had not had a drink. When before I had to find a house for him and his family to live, and I only found a neighbor that was a black man that rented the house to him. That man got married to that woman because there wasn't a pastor that would marry them, being mixed. And our pastor refused to marry him in the church. But Eileen opened her house, and that couple were married by a licensed minister in Eileen and her husband's house. So we were close to that man, and yet he claimed to have gotten hurt on my boat and suing me. I still knew that he wasn't going to win that lawsuit. In my own mind, God has given me assurance. And sure enough, he lost the lawsuit. He still goes to church. He's sick right now, and he hasn't been able to come for 2 or 3 weeks. But he was there Easter Sunday, I think. He's on my prayer list, and he calls us every day or two. Lives right down here.
His father was from the Grand Caymans. He's from the Grand Caymans. And my dad sponsored his dad to come to this country and family. And so we've got long family ties with him. And so it was particularly hurtful to be sued by him. But they are now friends and colleagues.
Yeah, and his father came to the United States. We had to sign a thing that for 2 years, we would guarantee that he wouldn't be a state ward. You know what I mean? That he would. And so he lived with us, and I got him a job with a Christian contractor, and turned out great. We were friends for the rest of his life.
Yeah. This picture was taken in 1982. That is Dad mending nets, and that is my son, his grandson, and who is now the halibut fisherman. I just had to show you that. So one of my favorite photos.
That's awesome.
And when I find that video, I'm not sure where I have it, but I'll send it to you. It was
give me a picture of the drilling ship. I want him to see that. There it is right there. Yeah. This is the type of ship that I was captain of. Not this particular one, but I was, this was a more modern ship, but I was captain of a drilling ship, and we had like 40 men aboard. And these ships are limited in size because you have to keep anchored over a special, you're going to drill for oil or manganese or whatever you're looking for. You've got to stay there. So I was blessed to be on the first one that ever had the kind of gear to keep them there. Now all of those drilling ships have that. And I took one quite a lot like this. It has a little longer tower, higher tower. I took one called the Glomar 2. The company that I worked for was Global Marine Exploration. And so we drilled the Marianas Trench, which is the deepest ocean in the world. And we took core samples out of that, core samples out of the Venezuela Trench in the Caribbean. And then I wasn't involved, except I took the Glomar 2, which is a second ship that this company had built. I took the Glomar 2 to the North Sea in 1966 during the 6-Day War between the Arab nations, and the federal government, after the World War II ended, had some ships that could be converted for other use. Some were island freighters and other purposes. Well, they had built an experimental ship as a minesweeper, and it was the wooden minesweepers were all about 135 foot. If you have seen Jacques Cousteau's boat. Did you see it? It used to be. Well, they did a lot of oceanography, and he's the one that developed the method of diving, and with anyhow, deep. They can go deep water with just backpack. Anyhow, the government had this big minesweeper laying in Long Beach. Well, actually, at edge of San Pedro, Long Beach. Uh, uh, Boatyard, and they had given it. The government had given it to the Long Beach San Pedro Sea Scouts, and Global Marine had bought that boat from the Sea Scout. Now remember, it was an exploratory boat. It was a minesweeper, which means you don't have any magnetism on the boat. All your equipment is non-metallic, non-magnetic. You know what I mean? And they had this big old boat that they had given to the Sea Scouts, and when the Russians lost their first nuclear submarine, my company bought that and converted it to go look for that Russian sub, and found it. And the Glomar 2 that I took to the North Sea and was leased for a year to the oil company, the British oil company. They have service stations here in our area now, but at that time they didn't. But that ship had some equipment on it that most normal ocean-going ships wouldn't have, and they found the Russian sub.
It's a pretty amazing story because they found the sub intact with all the sailors on board, and if they could bring it up somewhat whole, which they did, it did crack, but they were able to get a lot of Russian secrets. But they also were able to return the Russians. I think they did a burial at sea, and it's a big write-up. It was huge, all top secret. Howard Hughes funded it. It was a big deal.
My license doesn't allow me to skipper steam powered. It only has to be reciprocating engine, pistons. This one is steam powered, and this one was leased to Saudi Arabia, and the king and queen of Saudi Arabia came for the coronation, the naming of that ship. And my wife and I were invited to the ceremony with probably 150 people on that ship, and the king and queen, and my boss, the head, the captain, the lead man for Global Marine, the president of the company, invited me to this so that I could meet the king and queen. And when he was looking for me with this crowd of people, he had a megaphone, and he didn't call me Travis ever. He always, "Hey, preacher, where's the preacher boy? I want you to meet the king and queen." that's the um, what, who's going to be elevated that much? I'm not. I'm just another employee. 600 employees in the company, and I get to be made chaplain of that group.
The bathroom is right in that hall and around.
Oh,
First
no.
right. Are you okay?
Oh, I was
So,
He's gonna say something.
oh, okay.
I've got to go soon. I've got to leave soon.
Oh, yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, you never even had a cup of coffee? Or...
it's no problem. No problem. I'm not thirsty, so.
Did you get what you were looking for?
I think
know
so.
You got more than you were looking for, but I'm hoping you got something you can use.
I think so. It would be great to interview you as well. Seeing as how you were you were part of his boat building process and was with him.
Yeah, I fished.
As well as your
I fished
son.
as a young adult. I mean, growing up, we all worked on the boat, but then my husband and I decided to go into fishing together after we got married, and we fished together until we bought a dragger, and then it wasn't safe anymore for my babies, and that's when I got shore duty. Yeah, the trolley.
Yeah. Well, I know you must have a lot of questions, and I'm willing to answer, but we've had a good monologue.
Yes, we have. It's very interesting to listen to you.
Hasn't it been, I've given you a little bit of what I could remember and talk about with assurance, but hasn't it been a good life for me
I agree.
to have 4 wonderful children, girls, and 4 wonderful boys, and be able to put them into college? She graduated from nursing school. Her daughter graduated from nursing school. And it just brings tears to my eyes to think what God has allowed in my life. And it isn't just my immediate family, but what a family I have along the whole West Coast, clear to Alaska. I took a drilling ship to Cook Inlet, and I didn't want to go, and I told the Marine captain of the company, Captain Grant Allen, I said, "This is too early to take a ship to Cook Inlet. We don't want to go now. We're going to have inclement weather, and probably the inlet won't be thawed out enough. The inlet gets a lot of fresh water. A lot of rivers dump 200 miles that Cook Inlet is long, and so there's a lot of river." And sure enough, we arrived there April 3rd. We didn't get up the inlet till May 10th. It was frozen over, no sea traffic until May 10th. We were the first ship up the inlet in 1966. And we were supposed to leave by the equinox, September 17th. The company was drilling for oil at 17,000 feet, just below Anchorage. And the company we had leased it to, and they wouldn't release the ship. So the deadline came, and the company that had leased the ship extended the lease from our company with the idea that they would insure the ship till it got back to Port Hueneme down here by below Santa Barbara. That ship, the Cuswan, give the pamphlet, global pamphlet. It's laying there. I want him to see the.
He's gonna have to go, Dad.
That's Avila.
Oh, here it is.
Yeah, this is what the Cuswan and the Glomar fleet looked like.
We actually lived aboard the Cuswan.
That's the original. That's the one they drilled the Moho project with.
You lived on.
We lived on board one summer while he was outfitting the Sea Adler. They allowed him, it was mothballed and used as the office for the company in Terminal Island, but it still was a ship, so it had to have a captain on board and a skeleton crew at all times. So they allowed him to be the captain and bring us aboard, and he got a skeleton crew to maintain the engines and everything. But we were able to live on board while he outfitted the Sea Adler. So we worked on the boat all day, and he was getting paid to be the residing captain. It was quite an experience.
Great.
And then that's a Cuswan. If you turn it, you'll see Glomar 2. There's the pictures. Yeah. Oh, no, that's the anchor system. That's a cap. Okay. Yeah, that's no, that's the Explorer. I skippered both of those ships too, Explorer and the Rincon. But they built a ship, the Glomar 2. I took that one to the North Sea. Anyhow, it was yeah, you can see there's what she looks like anchored up, and we had a helicopter aboard, and probably an average of 40 men aboard all the time when we work in that deep water. Of course, some of the men are from different oil companies, like that did the Schlumberger work and the Keystone photography, and because we have to navigate the drill, and so they put a little small camera with a compass, 360-degree film on it, and that goes down the hole and so on, so that we can determine where that drill bit is going to be in a 3-mile lease. Yeah, all the leases are 3 mile, a mile or so, So it's not just navigating the ship; you're navigating the operation, which requires people like Keystone, the camera people, and Schlumberger that does some of the analysis of what's being brought up in the returns, and then other industry, oil industry, petroleum industry people. So you got a real mix.
He's gotta go, Dad.
Yeah, all right. He got a girlfriend waiting for him.
I don't know.